All right, let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, How to Secure Windows Using Application Control with independent IT and security expert Russell Smith. You're also joined by Beyond Trust Product Manager Jason Silva, who will run through an overview and a brief demo of PowerBroker for Windows towards the end of the webinar, so I encourage you to stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today, and I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. So you should find that question box over to the right side of your screen. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. So at this point, I'd like to hand it on over to Russell, who'll jump right into his presentation. Hey, Russell, welcome. Thank you for being here today with us. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Sarah, for the introduction, and welcome to today's presentation. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm an independent IT consultant and I specialize in Windows management and security, and I'm also a regular blogger over at the Petri IT knowledge base. And if you're particularly interested in security, you'll find stuff also in the Windows IT Pro archive. I'm a trainer over at Pluralsight. I've got a couple of Microsoft Azure courses there, and I also blog for Netflix. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please feel free to use my handle there. I've also got a book out at the moment on the subject of least privilege security. There's lots of useful technical information, but not only, also details about how you can manage the political challenges of removing administrative rights from your users. Okay, so before we get started, I would also like to just ask everybody today a quick question. Is anybody already using application control or some form of application control in your company as it stands today? So you'll see a little hands up icon on the GoToMeeting panel. I'd just like to get a quick idea if anybody is using maybe software restriction policies or a third-party product already. So if you just take a couple of seconds, you can see a couple of hands going up there. Okay, thanks. That gives me a good idea. So products like PowerBroker are all about, of course, removing administrative rights from end users. But that isn't enough to secure your system. You need to take a defense in-depth approach. So there are several things that you can do in addition to removing administrative rights. One of them, of course, is to block unapproved code. Also to restrict access to Win32 applications, so you might set up your own Windows Store for Business, of course. There's still the traditional anti-malware software that plays a role. Even though it's thought to be only about 50% effective, it's still important to have there. And of course, you should always keep Windows and all of the apps installed on each system up to date. So you need to do all these things together in order to secure Windows. One or the other by itself is not enough. So what do we have here with defense in depth? Of course, we have the aspect of least privilege security, and we're going to remove administrative rights. That's hopefully a given, and that protects the core system configuration so that users can't mess around with key system files that might destabilize the system or allow a hacker to leak information without the users knowing. But we also need to protect the user space, because when we remove administrative rights, it doesn't necessarily stop a user from being able to install an application on their device. For instance, a portable application like Google Chrome, you can install that without any admin rights. So we need some other system to block those kinds of installations. And that's where application control comes in. So we can block unauthorized applications, and of course that also includes applications that a hacker might get onto a system by stealth. And of course it also helps with our configuration management, because we don't necessarily want users installing software that we haven't tested, that maybe isn't licensed, or also that might cause stability or usability problems with the system. So what options do we have in Windows? Well, as a legacy solution, software restriction policies that came with Windows XP, and that wasn't very widely adopted because it was quite difficult to manage and implement, but it's there if you're still using Windows XP. AppLocker came along a little bit later, and it uses the same technology as software restriction policies, but Microsoft improved the manageability of it. So it was easier to implement, and I'm going to show you how to switch that on in a few seconds. And new in Windows 10 is a new application control technology called Device Guard. And this works differently from AppLocker, and I'll explain a little bit about it after the AppLocker demo. But for most of us, probably AppLocker is the key technology that's built into Windows that will be available to almost everybody on today's webcast. So that's the technology that I'm going to show you in this demo. So just give me 2 seconds and I'm going to swap over to a virtual machine, which I made earlier. Let me just expand it. Oh, great. Okay. That is not good. So just give me 1 second and I will reset the virtual machine. So at least we know that Windows Update is working there. So I'm just going to restart it, reconnect to it. Okay. So here we go. Now because I've restarted the VM, it might be a little bit slow, which is a bit unfortunate, and I had a couple of things kind of pre-set up, but that's not really a problem. It'll take me 2 seconds. So I'm going to log on here as myself. At the moment I'm an administrator. I'm going to remove myself from the administrators group so that you can see how AppLocker really works. So I'm just going to come into computer management here and check my user rights. That's going to take a few seconds because Windows likes to do a lot of stuff after it's just started up. Hopefully that will come up any second. There we go. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove myself from administrators. There we go. And so that I can log on, because I'm doing this through Hyper-V, I need to be a remote desktop user. And there we go. Now, in order for those rights to take effect, I need to log out and log back in again. Just give it 2 seconds while it thinks about that. So, sorry here, the demo is very slow. So I'm just going to sign out. There we go. And now I'm signing in just as a standard user, and anything I need to do in terms of configuring the system, I will just elevate my privileges temporarily in order to do that. Okay. So I'll just reconnect to full screen. Okay, so I'm going to log back on. And the first thing that I need to do in order to get AppLocker working is to start the application identity service. Now I'm going to do that manually, but of course in your environment you could do that using group policy. So what I need to do is just start up a command prompt here. And I'm going to run that as an administrator. So it's going to ask me for the local administrator password. Hopefully you'll see a command prompt there, open up in a second, and I'm just going to temporarily start that service. It's called AppID SVC to make sure that's running. If that's not running, then nothing connected to AppLocker will work. So I let that start up, And in order to configure AppLocker, I'm going to use local policy. Again, in an Active Directory environment, you can use group policy to do this. It's exactly the same configuration. So again, I need to start a management console with local administrator privileges so that I can access the system configuration. Hopefully it'll find that in a second. There we go. So it won't let me right click, so the demo gods are not with me today. There we go, run as administrator. For some reason that's not happening. Let's try again. There we go. So I'm going to run that as an administrator as well. Hopefully that will start up now. And I'm going to add a group policy to this MMC console. Just click group policy there. I'm going to do this on the local computer. And what I need to do is I need to find application control policies under Windows settings. Let's let that expand. So I find that under security, and you can see there application control policies. Now what I'm going to do is show you how to configure this quite simply. And what I recommend that you do is for each category, so you can control executables, you can control MSIs, you control scripts, and package app rules you only get in Windows Vista, Windows 8 and later. These are Windows Store apps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the default rules here for each category. And you can see there what we get populated are rules that allow the system to basically keep working. So if we were to block everything, if I restart Windows or try to log into Windows again, probably I'd lock myself out. So there are certain things that we need to keep all of the time. So if you have a look here, the default rules for executables are all files located in the Programs Files folder, in the Windows folder, and anybody in the built-in administrators group can also bypass these rules. Okay, and now all I need to do here is enable those rules for each of those categories. If I come back to the command prompt, we can see that the application identity service has started. And I'm going to apply those rules, and now that should be up and effective on this machine. So in actual effect, this hasn't really changed anything, I hope. So I should be able to open, for instance, Edge. I should be able to do that, and it should work, and you can see there it's working. That's great. Okay. Now, I had these links already prepared, but they're probably gone now. But if I decide to download Google Chrome, which your users may well do, so I'm going to accept all of that. And you can see here it's trying to download Chrome setup.exe. So I've let that download. And one thing that I forgot to do, which may or may not be necessary, is a GP update, but I'll do it just in case. Windows 10 tends to apply policy straight away, but if you're on Windows 7, you'll definitely need to do a GP update. And if the demo gods are with me, I should be blocked from running that executable. So if I click run, I don't know what's going to happen. Ah, there we go. So you can see that that has been blocked. Why is it being blocked? Well, because it doesn't exist in the program files folder or in the Windows folder, and I'm not an administrator on this machine, so I can't run it. So that's all very well. That blocks the executable, but there are other ways to install Chrome. I could download the offline MSI installer. So let's have a go. So I'm a user. I want to try and install Chrome. Let's see if I can get the offline MSI link to come up. So hopefully this is the right link. Yep. So here you can see Chrome MSI 64. And I'm going to accept and download that. I'm just going to save that to the downloads folder. Now, this should actually run. Now, why will it run? Because if we go back into the AppLocker rules here, and I have a look for the Windows installer rules, you can see the first rule is to allow all digitally signed Windows installer files. Now, because this is coming from Google, Windows trusts this if it's a signed MSI. And, well, we can pretty much safely assume that it's signed. So if I try to run that, you can see, there we go, it's trying to now configure Chrome on my system. I'm going to cancel it. I don't want it to do that. But you see that it went first the pass screen, and actually started to install Chrome. So my AppLocker rules at the moment don't protect me against that. So what if I want to block that MSI? So I'm going to come back into the group policy console here. And what I need to do is I need to change this first rule. Rather than to trust all publishers that the system trusts, I'm going to change that to only trust Microsoft. So what I need to do is to get the string that determines Microsoft as a publisher. And what I can do is just create a new rule for a packaged app. Just click through the default settings. And if I select an app that's already installed to create this rule, just to take a few seconds to think. So for instance, I don't know, anything should be okay. Let's select Cortana, for instance. And I can see that I've got the string there for Microsoft as a publisher. I'm going to copy that out. I'm just going to copy it into Notepad just in case I lose it somewhere along the way. There we go. I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to come back to my Windows installer rules, click on the first rule that trusts all digitally signed MSI files. I'm going to put in Microsoft there as the only publisher that I'm going to trust. So we've got the full string. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to update policy, just in case. Just wait for that to finish. There we go. Now, if I come to my downloads folder, if you remember I'd already downloaded that MSI. So there we can see it. We've got the Chrome setup exe, which should still be blocked. Yeah, that's blocked. Before we were able to run this at MSI, what I'm hoping now, if the demo gods are with me, that this should now be blocked. So I'm going to double click on that. And you can see that it doesn't get very far. Okay. Before we actually went on to a screen that told me that Google Chrome is now installing on this system. This time we didn't get that far. It did kind of start to launch it, but then jumped in and blocked it. So now, in principle, anything that comes from Microsoft, whether if it's in the form of an MSI, I can install it, but something that comes from another manufacturer, even something that we might want to trust, like Google, for instance, is also going to be blocked. So in a nutshell, that is how application control works in Windows 7 and upwards. If you want to create whitelists, there's a feature in AppLocker that allows you to scan a system. So if you click on automatically generate rules, it will scan the entire system for MSI files and it will automatically create those rules for you. Okay, so I'm just going to come back to the presentation. So that's how AppLocker works, and at the very least you can switch it on Of course, the more rules that you create in AppLocker, the more complicated it gets to manage. But you can set it up so at least it only allows trusted scripts and executables to run. And that's going to provide a certain amount of protection against malware. In Windows 10 we have Device Guard, which uses a different system. Now, this is something that Microsoft have designed based around kernel mode and user mode code integrity. And it uses a little bit of virtualization trickery to make a tamper-proof application control system so that you can be really sure your users or any malicious hackers cannot bypass the system. And it works by creating a chain of trust all the way from the hardware right up to a virtual bubble called virtual secure mode, which isolates the decision-making process of Device Guard itself from the Windows kernel. So it differs architecturally from AppLocker. And there are different things that Device Guard is designed to do, depending on what kind of hardware you've got, whether you can take advantage of those virtualization-based security features that also work with Device Guard. So you can see a little bit about the architecture there, how virtual secure mode actually uses Hyper-V. So if your devices are Hyper-V compatible, they will should also work with virtual secure mode. And you can see there how certain components are isolated from the main Windows operating system. So there are a couple of requirements, of course, for virtual secure mode. So you need a UEFI in native mode. You can't have a legacy BIOS there. You need to have Windows 10 Enterprise 64 bits. And of course, the general requirements for Hyper-V are second layer address translation, or whatever it's called for AMD chips. It's not compulsory to have a trusted platform module, but if you do, then the more secure that solution is going to be. There are of course some disadvantages of using Device Guard in Windows 10. There are no GUI tools at the moment or centralized management. If your apps are not signed, then it is possible to manage them using Device Guard, although it's a little bit more difficult. And you need to really have a managed environment, because even with AppLocker, I would say, if you don't have a managed environment and users are installing and removing different kinds of software all of the time, then it's going to be really difficult to deal with something like AppLocker and Device Guard. And it can also cause some problems with antivirus solutions. If you have something like Norton or Symantec or McAfee installed on your systems. And of course, it's not designed to protect against all attack vectors. So for instance, the Windows Store. Everything in the Windows Store is trusted by Microsoft, so anything in the Windows Store people will be able to install. It's not designed maybe to also protect against things like macros that run inside of trusted applications. Like if you downloaded a Word file which you trust, and then that opens up a macro that does something malicious, there are other mechanisms to protect against those kinds of problems. Okay, so I hope that gives you a good idea of what application control is, how you can set it up in Windows 7 or Windows 10 if you're moving to that solution, and what other options there are in Windows 10 if you want a more secure version of application control. But now I'm going to hand over to Jason, who's going to give you a demo of Power Broker and show you what that can do over and above AppLocker.
Jason, are you there? Well, let's see. Maybe he lost his connection. We'll give him another minute here. All right, well, let's see if we can wait for Jason to rejoin. In the meantime, I had a couple questions come in for you, Russell, oh, actually it looks like Jason is joining now. Are you back, Jason?
Yes, hello. So I see that you
Okay,
made the
hello.
presenter. I assume Russell has finished up?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
All right. I apologize. I
you.
lost you about, I don't know, 5 minutes ago or something like that. So I am back now. Good news is I don't have a lot of slides to actually have to go through. What I wanted to talk about was this Power Broker for Windows, and officially it's a least privileged product, right? And a little bit about myself as well. Sarah introduced me in the beginning. I'm Jason Silva. I'm one of the product managers here at Beyond Trust. My focus is on our Power Broker for Windows and Power Broker for Mac tools, which essentially do the same thing, just on different operating systems. And the idea is, the first part about what Russell was talking about is to allow you to drop the rights of your users down to a standard user. But within those policies and rules, it does have application control. And app control really is about a yes, no. Are you allowed to run the application or not? And one of the things that we see a lot of is when folks are just using app control, whether it be SRP, whether it be device guard, if you leave the user as an administrator, I can get around it. And Russell even did part of that in his part of it as well when he was turning on the application identity service. Well, guess what? If you have the authority to turn it on, you can shut it off, and then your app control is done. I've even gone through, just to have some fun with it, if I have administrative rights, I can destroy the registry to a point where even Microsoft can't turn app identity back on. So what we need is something to put in place that says, okay, you're a standard user, but I understand you have a job to do. Well, let's go ahead and put some rules in place. So I'm going to just kind of kick right in and show a little bit of that as I go through this. So like I mentioned, there's a little more time than I usually get, so that's good. I'm going to just run an application, right? This has nothing to do with app control. This is just a regular old Microsoft application. But I'm a standard user. I can't do that. All right, well, I want my users not only to get the yes, no, these things are allowed, but if they get there, they should be allowed to actually take, be fully functional with the application. If I invite somebody in my house, do I also allow them to go into the fridge without having to ask me every time? There is just some things that guests, I allow them to do, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the management part of what this Power Broker for Windows is, and there's actually 3 different ways that I can manage the tool. This is the group policy extension. If you've ever seen group policy preferences, you've already seen our stuff. Microsoft actually picked that piece of their group policy up from us back in 2006. This Power Broker for Windows used to be the same suite, but we, shelled out. We call the company something different now and call the product something different as well. So what I just tried to do there was launch this this data source configuration. I have a rule that is in place here, and essentially it's an application control rule, right? I mean, I do want you to be able to do that. I'm not specifically denying the launch of it. I just didn't grant it any other rights when you first tried to run it. But what this rule will do is it's going to go in and say, okay, you're still a standard user. You're still launching the application, but the application itself now has more rights than your security token could have given it. So I'm still going to run it as that standard user that's logged in, but I'm going to grant a little more rights to it. So I'm going to go over and watch what happens when sort of this applies. And much like what Russell was doing with the GP update, I'll do the same thing. I do want my, my extension on this box here to go and find these new policies that now exist. And then I'll get more specific with yes or no kind of stuff. So I'm launching this again, and now the app just runs fine, right? I wasn't able to create a system DSN before because, well, a standard user can't do that. And whether or not you'd ever want your standard users doing this particular activity, that's okay. It's just a real simple application that doesn't run fully without admin rights. I made their application run properly. Again, the important thing here is I'm still the same user that launched this application as I was a moment ago. I haven't changed anything about that. In a deeper dive into Power Broker for Windows, we'd get into, showing how do I do a run as, where I don't want my users to have the credentials, but the app does need to run to somebody else, all doable as well. Now, let me get into some of this app control stuff. Just for simplicity, I set up a couple of folders. I have this deny always, and sure enough, when I try to run this application, it's denied, right? As far as app control goes, nothing real fancy there either. All application control tools at their very core should be able to say yes or no to something. But that's where the differences kind of come in from say, native app control. Obviously, the message you get from native app control, it's a little generic. Your system admin said no, right? At least here you can describe to the user why. There may be different reasons why you told somebody you're not allowed to run this application, and I'll show a couple of them here. In this case, I just don't want the users running anything from this folder. Could have been the users folder, could have been the temp folder, whatever. Could have been anything on the box that wasn't specifically signed by Microsoft or Oracle or Adobe, whatever they might be. Messaging, of course, can be customized. I always encourage people to put a custom logo up here where my Beyond Trust logo is. The text that is read in here, you can change that up, especially when it comes to different language sets. Some our customers, Chinese, French, whatever it might be. They may not have English as their language. That's all right as well. But I can also direct people to email me. Maybe I denied something where it wasn't supposed to have been, or they feel it wasn't supposed to have been. They can go ahead and send me an email. I can link them to a URL. In a lot of cases, I just link them to the acceptable use policy. Look, here's why you can't be running these type of things. That's okay. Maybe it's to a help desk ticketing system, whatever it might be. And I also have an option for, for this passcode. There could be a way where you're denied this very moment, but I understand it was an error. So here's a code that's going to get you through this one time. There's a set of logging that's going on behind the scenes as well. Anything that I do with this Power Broker for Windows tool, it centralizes any of the events up to what's called Beyond Insight. Beyond Insight is just our reporting platform. You get it with the software. It's not a big deal. It's just SQL Server with IAS on top of it kind of thing. But it would allow me to say, oh, look at that. 14 people today were denied running this application. I got a couple of folks telling me that it shouldn't be denied. It is something that has to do with work. All right, let me go ahead and shut the rule off for that, right? It's a faster way to know without everyone having to tell you, I see the same activities occurring, kind of across the board. But then I have this other folder that says, or read, like I should say, proper grammar, allow only with PBW. Right? So I'm going to initially deny things. It still got denied. Well, what's the point here, right? Well, there's a way that you can actually tell this Power Broker for Windows, I want you to deny things in this folder unless Power Broker for Windows is already managing its parent. So the best example of that would be an installer. In most examples of anyone's app control, and Russell actually had the same thing, I have similar rules set up as well. I'll deny anything from the user's profile. So when I go and I download Google Chrome and I drop it to someplace that I can write into, I don't naturally just want those things to be able to run. Even if it's an app that doesn't need admin rights, they're just things that I don't know what you're possibly going to put in there, so I'm going to start off and just deny it. But if I've elevated an installer, what happens with installers, and you see this too, it spawns a bunch of children. Those children may end up in a location that's denied. I need to make sure that those can go through. So the rule that I've put in place that initially denies this folder at the same time, and I'll show this, because I like to show rather than just talk and tell. It's this rule right here. It says, look, if the parent process has changed the token, then disable this rule. And this rule is the one that initially denied that folder, right? So there's another type of rule, which again on a deeper dive we'd get more into. It's called the shell rule. You come across something that needs elevation or whatnot. I didn't make a rule for it. I'll give you an option to right-click and request that you will be allowed to run this application with whatever elevation it might need. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to request that. This particular message, to get through it, I can ask for the user's, credentials. I can ask for the user to enter a justification with free text or a drop-down, or, or I ask for like a one-time password. And I stuttered when I talked because apparently I can't log into my phone and talk at the same time. I'm just logging into my Duo app on my phone here. This happens to use Radius. That's the one I want. So go ahead and tell me, okay, approve, confirm. Now the application is allowed. Again, the only thing that was different in the way that I launched it right now is that PowerBroker for Windows was in control of a parent process. The parent in this case was what happened when I used the shell rule. I've allowed that behavior to go through. I wouldn't have to, but I can. So we've covered a couple of examples here. One is a straight up yes, no, you can or cannot run it. Another one is, to start with, I'm going to deny the application unless, I, as in PowerBroker for Windows, unless I'm already in control of the process. But what about when applications are trusted? They're allowed, again, regardless of if they need elevation or not. Adobe Reader is one of those things, or even Firefox is one of those things. Maybe Firefox is a supported browser at your company. But here's the problem. What happens when these things become vulnerable? And that happens a lot with Adobe. I'm not picking on Adobe in any way. I use it all the time. But it is a common attacked application to find exploits in it. So I have these other rules that, again, go along with app control and really just protecting you. And I've set them up into low, medium, and a high risk. Down here in the high risk category, I have rules that specifically point out Adobe and Firefox. So if I allow Firefox to run in my organization, and it goes on, when Firefox gets to a point where there's a known vulnerability on it that's older than 30 days, regardless of how severe the vulnerability might be, this being a web browser, it concerns me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flat out deny the application. Not because it's Firefox, but because it happens to be a version of Firefox that has some kind of vulnerability that's outlasted, say, your company's SLA for patching things up. Similar to that is with my Adobe rule. Still the same 30-day sort of cutoff, but only when it hits a high risk. If you got a version of Reader that has an older than 30-day vulnerability and it's a medium or it's a low risk, I have other rules to sort of handle that. I might just log the fact that they're in existence and being used by my end users, but I didn't directly deny it. I might get to 60, 45, 90 days, whatever it might be, before I start denying those things. So these rules are already in place, and the effect is very similar to the first thing I had done. It gets denied. Same kind of deal, whatever kind of user messaging that you might want to put in front of this to tell the users, it was denied, and it was supposed to be denied, and here's why. The app you're calling contains a serious security flaw, and it's been blocked. Much better than your system admin said no, kind of thing, right? And the same thing with Firefox. I run a version of Firefox, and it gets denied. If I upgrade, whether that's through SCCM or manually, if I upgrade Firefox or Adobe to a point where it doesn't meet the criteria of my, say, call it risk threshold, go ahead, run it all day long. Again, you're running it as a standard user, but I'm monitoring the fact when, at what point would this otherwise trusted application become a threat to the company. At the same time, again, I'm logging all of these events. When I want to log anything at all, part of that is the hash of the application. Those hashes are all being routed through VirusTotal for you. It gets reported back. These applications have malware. I'm not looking to replace your AV. In fact, to keep AV on there, you need antivirus, to the whole defense in depth kind of thing. But it's another mechanism that just kind of happens automatically for you to let you know that there are some applications that could cause some harm to the company, whether it's because they have flat-out malware or they are trusted applications which other people try to exploit. That's where a lot of the breaches are starting. They're starting at an individual application. They exploited it, they got on the system, and then they move horizontally through, eventually up to servers and get the data that they really want, right? So at a high level, that's what PowerBroker for Windows is. Again, it's a least privilege tool. It's an application rights management tool. whether it be a straight up, I'm a standard user, some apps I run need elevation, that's at its core, whether it be application control, yes, no, maybe so kind of thing, it can sort of handle that all. All right, so I appreciate you guys listening to my sort of part of this as well, and I believe, Sarah, you always love when I do this part of it.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and jump into our last poll, and then we have some time for Q&A here at the end. We would love to help you guys with your privileged access and even your vulnerability management needs. So would you be interested in being contacted for a deeper conversation or a more thorough one-on-one demo of PowerBroker or Retina? So if you select yes, somebody will be in contact with you, walk you through a demo, or have a great conversation with you about privileged access management or vulnerability management, how we can help you guys out. So I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into a few more questions. Jason, this came in for you. With PBW, one can author policy to prevent download of an app. Therefore, what is the upside to AppLocker?
So in some ways, if you use PowerBroker for Windows, you just don't need AppLocker anymore, because we'll handle the AppLocker part of what it's supposed to do. So I'm not going to necessarily prevent the download, although there is part of PowerBroker for Windows which would actually prevent you from writing to folders, right? So you wouldn't even be able to download, but that's a whole other conversation. So let's say, for instance, you got the file on there. Then you can use PowerBroker for Windows to prevent the launch of whatever it is you downloaded. Or keep on using AppLocker. If you have a good set of AppLocker or even been using Device Guard for a bit and you want to use that, I won't get in the way of that either. So use either one. But if you're using PBW, you're not forced to use AppLocker. And PowerBroker for Windows is going to work on a wider breadth of Windows operating systems than AppLocker or Device Guard is going to limit you to.
Another one for you, Jason. You mentioned SCCM. Is there some level of integration between PowerBroker and SCCM?
No, no. We actually had some reporting in there at one point, but if you've ever tried to work with SCCM, it's not the easiest thing. So we have our own reporting platform, and if you're interested in that, I can certainly get into that a little bit as well. But there just doesn't need to be. There's enough ways to control the rule set for PowerBroker for Windows, telling the clients what they should and shouldn't be doing and allowing. We don't need to put it also into SCCM. There's group policy. Our reporting platform called Beyond Insight can hold the rules, and the clients can check into that. And there's also McAfee EPO as well, if you want to let your EPO infrastructure hold the rules for PowerBroker for Windows.
Jason, so once it finds a file to block, can it delete the file as well?
It won't delete the file, but if you really wanted it to, you could quarantine it. So we can move it to a place in the file system where the users don't interact with, and even if they found their way there, the files are all hashed up anyway. You could always restore from it as well, in case you find you made a mistake, right? So it's an interesting point, though. We have discussed should we delete, but there's always that fine line between finality and protection.
Russell, I think this came in while you were speaking. Can AppLocker be managed or integrated with Active Directory?
Yes, it can be managed using Active Directory group policy objects. So everything that I demoed on the machine there was all local configuration, just for simplicity in the demonstration. But all of those settings that I configured for AppLocker are exactly the same for a group policy object, which you can then apply to as many devices as you like.
Does Device Guard only work with enterprise licenses?
Yes, Device Guard is a feature of Windows 10 Enterprise Edition and Education Edition, whatever other fancy editions Microsoft have these days, but it doesn't work with Professional.
This question came in. I'm going to combine. There's two questions that came from the same person. Russell, what are the differences between AppLocker and Device Guard, and when would you use both AppLocker and Device Guard on the system?
Right, well, I'll start with the last question. You might use AppLocker and Device Guard on the same system. For instance, if you wanted to stop people from running particular applications from the Windows Store, because Device Guard works purely on the basis of trust. So it uses certification authority, which is a bit like a real-life notary. Yeah. So do we trust this application? Has it been signed by a certification authority? And everything that's in the Windows Store is automatically trusted by Microsoft. So we trust Microsoft to curate the Windows Store, if you like. So, so Device Guard doesn't block individual applications in the store itself. So you might want to switch on AppLocker in conjunction with Device Guard to say, well, actually, although Device Guard trusts the Windows Store, I also want to allow users to only to run and install specific applications from the store. The first part of the question, I've forgotten. What was the first part of the question? Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, the differences between AppLocker and Device Guard.
Okay, so the key difference, I mean, the end result is kind of the same, it's application control, but Device Guard is based on a different technology that integrates with virtualization-based security. Basically what that means is the engine, the Device Guard engine, which ultimately makes those decisions about whether an application can run or not run, is protected in a virtual bubble, if you like. So it runs outside of the main Windows kernel. So the idea is that if the Windows kernel becomes compromised, for whatever reason, with AppLocker, the malicious actor can essentially just turn off AppLocker. But with Device Guard, everything for this kernel mode protection is protected in that virtual bubble. So if the Windows kernel becomes compromised, the malicious guy cannot just turn off Device Locker like he might be able to do with AppLocker. So you have a much higher level of assurance that your application control policies, even in the worst case scenario, should be effective and should carry on protecting. I hope that makes sense.
Russell, how does AppLocker affect software installs coming from the server side?
Well, again, AppLocker has different kinds of rules. So you can check an executable, is it signed and trusted by the system? Doesn't matter where it's located, whether it's on a server, share, or whether it's downloaded from the internet. You can add a file path. So if a file is located in a particular location, you are going to allow that to run. That is not the most secure way to use AppLocker, but it's possible to do that. You can also use file hashes as well. So yes, you can basically allow or block executables or MSI files on a server file share.
I don't know if this is for Russell or Jason, maybe both of you guys. Richard's asking, if for some reason a weaponized file were to get through, is there a way to recall all copies of the violating file?
Well, with AppLocker, no, definitely not.
Yeah, not with FireBroker for Windows, but if we can detect the hash of it, we can send out a rule that will at least quarantine them. But recalling,
yeah, he's asking also, is there a capability to trace all endpoints that downloaded the violating file?
Yeah, I can show you where it's been attempted at least, or even launched from. I'm not going to do a scan of the entire enterprise to see data at rest, but you know, applications attempted or even launched, I can centralize and show you where all those are pretty easily, actually. And one quick thing, not to get sidetracked from that. The question on AppLocker and Device Guard. Last month, Russell, you had done a pretty focused demo around that as well. So when you all get the recording for this, I believe it's in the same locations. You can just take a peek for last month and if you get some good answers on Device Guard as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, that's definitely on our website. You guys can find that beyondtrust.com under the resources section. Let's see. It looks like we have one more question in. Thanks, everybody, for submitting your questions. These are great. I think this is for you, Jason. How are rules policy for Mac OS created and managed?
Oh, very similar to the way they're created with Windows. There's an editor that we use, and this particular editor is not the group policy extension one. It's an exe that sort of sits on its own, and it controls both policy for Windows and Mac. I can show it if you need to, actually.
All right, cool. I guess we are done. That was a lot of questions. Thanks, everybody, for submitting those. We do appreciate you guys participating and getting to know our speakers and asking for more and all your questions. So thank you so much. Okay, so let me wrap this up. A reminder that you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording and the slide shown here today. It will be in your inbox to the email with which you registered for this webinar in about a business day or two, so you should receive it definitely before the end of the week. And it will come from our email alias communications@beyondtrust.com, so make sure that that email address is whitelisted so you receive it without interruption. You can forward it on and rewatch as you please. Big thanks to our speakers, Russell and Jason. Thanks, guys. A lot of information. We crammed a lot of content and questions into today's session, so I really appreciate you guys being on and walking our audience through this awesome topic. And to everybody who attended live, thanks for always being here. We appreciate you guys, and have a wonderful rest of your day and your week. We will see you guys next week for our webinar with Randy Franklin Smith. We will see you guys then. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.